But I would love to hurt him and finish him and put him out.
How was he punching? Was it hurting you?
Like a thunder. He punches like a mule kick. Unbelievable. Excuse my French, please. Oh, my God.
It's time!
You're listening to the Cage Nation TV Prizefight Podcast. Coming to you from the Coastal Cameron Studios in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Are you ready?
Here's your host, the big fella, Albert Cameron.
Let's get it on!
Thank you for joining us for the Prizefight Podcast. I'm your host, the big fella, Mr. Albert Cameron. And right now, I am a big bundle of emotion. Because every time I think I got my finger on something, every time I think I got it figured out, something comes along and says, listen here, tons of fun. Oh, hell no. Last week, I'm talking about how kickboxing's taken over. Kickboxing is proving me wrong. It's coming for the lion's share. And then, I don't know, maybe the boxing world was listening. Maybe the boxing part of the universe, the forces that pull people to enjoy watching boxing said, No, he's wrong. He's wrong. Boxing is where it's at. We're going to get into that today on the Prizefight Podcast. We're also going to be talking about heavyweights and where they're going. In the span of 10 years, the heavyweight division as a whole has decreased dramatically. And then put on your bibbed overalls, everybody. We're talking about GOATs. We are talking about GOATs, and I'm not talking about the GOATs. We're talking, what does the term greatest of all time really mean? Is anyone really deserving of it? And how do we quantify who qualifies to be the greatest of all time? It's a discussion-heavy episode of the Prizefight Podcast, everybody. Don't turn your dial or hit the space bar or however you're listening. We want to get you involved in this week's conversation, so make sure you like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, shoot us an email, okay? Your opinion, and I say this from the bottom of my heart, your opinion matters a lot more than what mine does. I'm just a guy who's behind a microphone. You all are the masses. And what you say, it is my obligation to put it out there into the universe. My job is to amplify your voice. That is what I do. We're going to take a break. We're going to talk about some events that are coming up in your area. And then when we come back, we're going to be talking about GOATs. We're going to be talking about heavyweights. We're going to be talking about boxing. It's all that right here on the Prizefight Podcast. Don't go nowhere. Hey everyone, while we're taking a break, we just want to remind you that right now we are looking for new people to join the Cage Nation TV roster of creators. We're looking for creators who have a fight circuit close to home, who have a sincere passion for combat sports, and would like to help us bring new territories to the forefront of our coverage. For more information, visit www.cagenationtv.com/opportunity/pioneer or send us an email at cagenationtv@gmail.com. Welcome back to the Prizefight Podcast. I'm your host, the big fella, Mr. Albert Cameron. And last week, I was talking about how kickboxing was coming for a piece of the UFC pie. Beginning of the year, I made a prediction. I said that with WME IMG doing everything they're doing in the middle of purchasing from Zuffa LLC, that boxing is going to come for a piece of the market share. It's going to fight for consumer dollars. Boxing is going to embrace innovations. Boxing is going to embrace big names. Boxing promoters are going to work with boxing promoters to try to restore some of the luster of boxing. I did not pay enough attention to kickboxing, and that was unfair of me to do. Glory was on Spike TV. Bellator started a kickboxing promotion. There are guys from the area where I'm from who are talking about starting kickboxing promotions. Guys in Pittsburgh, very active in Muay Thai, very active in Glory Rules Kickboxing, very active in kickboxing. And last week I went into a very long diatribe about how I gauge what future trends are going to be. What it really boils down to is I pay attention to what is happening in my local area because for one reason or another, the people who are in the State College, Altoona region really have an advanced vision. They really are able to prognosticate what is coming down the pipe, and we're able to take advantage of it. I'm able to take advantage of it. I mean, for as far as my coverage goes, I'm able to capitalize on the opportunities that they are identifying for me. Boxing is going to be coming to Altoona, Pennsylvania regularly, and that makes me very happy. Osahan Omoosagi, the Penn State boxing coach, but also Pinnacle FC and Complete Devastation MMA veteran, puts on a wonderful tournament every year. I had the opportunity of going to the 2016 tournament, and I was blown away. I've been a big proponent for team mixed martial arts ever since the IFL started. I think it's great. So team boxing was as close as I was going to get. But then I realized that I really enjoyed team sports in a combat sports sense. You know, it's cool to say, hey, Penn State's my team. But it only happens once a year. And I mean, though that's restraints, but OS does a wonderful job of bringing it every year. So when I hear that Altoona's bringing boxing very regularly, that made me very excited. And I'm looking at the card and things look good. I know the promoters, they are great folks who do great things, but there is something that I wanted to identify on a personal level. And I had this whole article planned for it. But Joey Dignan is going to be making his amateur boxing debut July 22nd at the Altoona Grand. Joey Dignan is the son of Jason Dignan. He's the nephew of Jim Dignan Jr. And normally, when a amateur's making their debut, you don't really get a whole lot of hype going because that's unfair to that athlete. It's unfair to say, oh, he's got the last name. We need to be putting very, very high expectations and a lot of pressure on that athlete. That is unfair to do for a debuting amateur. What's interesting about that is that Joey Dignan is going to be third generation combat sports in Altoona. And I don't know if anyone's ever taken the time to really acknowledge that lineage that Joey Dignan's coming from. Joey Dignan, can't say I've ever worked out with the kid personally, but knowing his family, they are great folks who try really hard, who excel in athletics, and I have nothing but high hopes for that kid's future. I'm sure he's going to do wonderful at boxing. I believe he's a wrestler, of course. Coming from the Dignan brothers' jiu-jitsu and judo, he's got a pedigree he's living up to. His father, Jason, and Uncle Jim have trained just about the who's who in Altoona Combat Sports. We think about the great fights that have happened in Altoona. We think about the moments where we stood up from our chairs and said, oh my God, that was awesome. You best believe the Dignan family was involved in that somehow. I remember Complete Devastation MMA 3. And this is right around the time that the MMA Rundown had started. People I worked with are watching the show because I'm telling them to. I'm pleading with them. But they were watching Charlie Gathers fight. And this is when Charlie Gathers gets out of a chokehold and starts doing jumping jacks. People are like, oh my God, what's going on with that? Jason Dignan was his trainer. Lenny Karlheim has done wonderful things for Altoona Johnstown MMA. He is a Dignan student. Ryan Glunt, a Dignan student. I'm always going to be that guy who sits back and says, you know what? Altoona's where I came from. And I didn't even come from Altoona. I come from a little S-hole town called Houtsdale. But Altoona is where the beginnings of my passions are always going to be. In time, I want to be a world-renowned fight commentator. That's what I want to do. That is my calling. That is what I'm working towards every time I get behind the mic. Every time I go to a fight. That is the end game. I want to be like Hall of Fame, best sportscaster in the world. And always, I'm going to say that my road began in Altoona. So I have a lot of endearments to the great fights of Altoona. Even fights that, aren't directly tied to the Dignan family, still are kind of tied to the Dignan family. Brett Schoenfeld, who was a main eventer for a lot of the Complete Devastations. And when I say a lot, I mean two. He was the main eventer too when he fought Billy Ward and when he fought Ted Worthington. Brett Schoenfeld has ties to the Dignan family. Jason and Jim Dignan are never going to be known as hard-ass coaches. Or at least, not by me. I never trained with them to study mixed martial arts, but, I always know them to be very, very uplifting people. And that's what I look for in a coach. Jason Dignan has a way of making everyone in the room feeling like, they're the most important guy. And I imagine that's the same case with the students. Jim Dignan, also a very good guy who's very uplifting. Those are the kind of coaches you want to compete for. I wrestled for 1 year. And in that 1 year, I wrestled for a guy named Ed Jones. And Ed Jones had a way of making every one of his athletes feel like the star. That's the kind of transformational leadership that athletes really need. Jason has put together a fight team that in my mind is all-star. But again, all my passions started in Altoona, Pennsylvania. If you're listening to the Prizefight podcast right now and you're thinking about all the great fights from Altoona, everything that's happened. The Dignan family has been involved in that somehow. I've tried in vain to try to get Jason and Jason on the episode of either the MMA Rundown or Cajun HDTV. Jim was great, and he talked about it, but Jason was very aloof. And I don't know if it's because he just doesn't want his mug on TV or if he just doesn't want to take any of the credit. Very humble guy. Jason and Jim come from a lineage of a very great man that I never had the opportunity to meet, but I've heard so many stories about him that I feel like I might even know him. And that man was named Wimp Dignan. Wimp brought judo from Japan to Altoona, and he taught his relatives. He taught them all judo. Pat Johnston, easily one of my best friends on planet Earth. Pat Johnston has made the trip up to State College to train with me, invited me down to Gallitzin so I could work out with him, because Pat understands what a big man's body mechanics are. And, Rob is a Dignan judo black belt. So when you're traveling with guys like Pat and Rob on a trip from Altoona to Pittsburgh, you hear stories about the man, and you hear how much integrity he carried. You hear about how he didn't put up with so-and-so BS, how whenever he put a belt on someone, that it had to be quality, that they had to have known their stuff, that he would accept no substitutes, that he would accept no cutting corners. With Joey Dignan making his boxing debut, he's really, really contributing to a third generation of Altoona Combat Sports being what it is. And so, not to put any pressure on Joey, but it was important for me to recognize that the Dignan family does have a very strong legacy in Altoona, and that it's awesome to see that that's carrying on another generation. So, Scorchin' Boxing happening July 22nd at the Altoona Grand Hotel. Get tickets. We're going to try to have a presence there one way or another, and it's going to be a great time. And it's important for us to get out and support combat sports. I mean, complete devastation went away from Altoona. We are given another opportunity. We get out there, we support boxing. It's Saturday night fights. It's the big fight atmosphere. That's why it's important for us to get out there. I talked about that a little longer than what I really wanted to, but it was important to say it, and I'm glad I got it off my chest. We're going to take a quick break. When we get back, we're going to be talking about where the heavyweights have gone, and then we're going to be talking about GOATs. It's the Prizefight Podcast. Don't go nowhere. This is the Cajun HDTV Fight Calendar, brought to you by Planet Aries Records. Planet Aries Records, independent music from our amps to your ears. June 17th in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, Olympic Boxing Day happens at the Aliquippa Croatian Center. June 24th in Charlotte, North Carolina, Fight Lab 56 goes down at center stage. June 30th in Monroeville, Pennsylvania, the Pittsburgh Boxing Classic gets underway at the Monroeville Convention Center. July 8th in Washington, Pennsylvania, King of the Cage Short Range throws down at the Meadows Casino and Racetrack. July 14th in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the Shanny Rumble happens at the Shannopin Country Club. Also on July 14th in Raleigh, North Carolina, Lightning Strikes Kickboxing throws hands at the Kerr Scott Building in Raleigh, North Carolina. July 22nd in Altoona, Pennsylvania, Scorchin' Boxing makes their promotional debut at the Altoona Grand Hotel. And August 26th in Wilmington, North Carolina, Battle in the South 15 happens at the Coastline Convention Center in Wilmington, North Carolina. The Cajun HDTV Fight Calendar brought to you by Planet Aries Records. Planet Aries Records, independent music from our amps to your ears. Welcome back to the Prizefight Podcast. I'm your host, the big fella, Mr. Albert Cameron. And during the break, I'm doing a little scratch padding here. I'm jotting down some notes. And not even 10 years ago, the UFC had 4 major weight classes. There was heavyweight, there was light heavyweight, there was middleweight, there was welterweight, and then as guys like Joe Stevenson, Sean Shirk, Kenny Florian came along, that introduced lightweight, which brought our weight class count to 5. And then as the WEC gets folded in to the Zuffa portfolio, and there's evidence to support that the WEC was meant to be a feeder system for lighter weights, we introduced featherweight at 45, bantamweight, and then strawweight at 25, which brings our total count up to 8. If you count some of the women's divisions that are in Invicta, which is not UFC, there might even be like 9 or 10. The point I'm trying to make here is, though, that in 10 years, we've made twice the progress in the stable of fighters that can compete. If you want a good idea of how really lopsided it was, look no further than the first season of The Ultimate Fighter. They had light heavyweights and middleweights. If not all the middleweights that competed, only 2 or 3 were natural middleweights, and I'm talking about Chris Lieben, Mike Swick, who competed at light heavyweight. He did that just to get on the show. And I'm kind of at a loss who that third one is, but I think I counted 3 natural middleweights. The rest of them, Diego Sanchez, who has fought at welterweight. He has fought at featherweight. I think he tried... He definitely did welterweight, lightweight, and I think he tried for featherweight. You had Kenny Florian, who immediately dropped to welterweight and then lightweight. Josh Koscheck went to welterweight. You see what's happening here. All these guys are dropping from the middleweight division, dropping down to lighter weights because there was no lighter weights for them to compete at. They just wanted an opportunity to compete. But all during this time, during the Ultimate Fighter, the heavyweight division was absolutely on fire. If we identify the dark ages of MMA being the time that Zuffa could not get pay-per-view exposure, I think that begins at UFC 29 is when Zuffa bought it out. And then the Dark Ages really ends at the beginning of the Ultimate Fighter Season 1. Between that time, it was a very bad time. But we had champions to get us through, and a lot of really good heavyweight champions. Rico Rodriguez, Tim the Maniac Silva, Frank Mir. And then Frank Mir gets hurt in a motorcycle accident. So then Andre the Pitbull Arlovsky gets named interim champion. And you can say what you want about interim champions, and a lot of people have really negative views on it, and I think interim champions are used way too much. But for an opportunity where Frank Mir is hurt, but the UFC heavyweight division's kind of shallow, an interim champion was the best opportunity. And then eventually Arlovsky was named undisputed heavyweight champion. There is a period of time between Arlovsky's interim reign until he lost the title to Tim Sylvia that he was untouchable. A lot of the internet fans are like, oh my god, Andre Arlovsky could beat everyone. We need Andre Arlovsky versus Fedor Emelianenko. We need it to happen right now. Where is it? Sign it, make it happen. I refer to that period of time as Arlovsky Mania. And then Tim Sylvia came in, he defeated Andre Arlovsky, and I hate to admit this, but when Tim Sylvia beat Andre Arlovsky in the rematch, I breathed a sigh of relief. Arlovsky Mania was over. We can move on. Other things can happen now. And the rest of that was history. Randy Couture defeated Tim Sylvia for the heavyweight championship. And then Brock Lesnar happened. And then somewhere along the line we got guys like Cain Velasquez, Junior Dos Santos, Antonio Nogueira. All the way down the line until we get to Fabrizio Verdum. The heavyweight division has history. But with every new champion it seems... And of course, Stipe Miocic. Stipe Miocic. But as the heavyweight division progresses, and as we're adding on all these new lighter weights, heavyweights have seemed to be dropping off the face of the earth. Regionally, at least. I highly doubt the UFC is ever going to find a problem finding heavyweights. Regionally here, we have a heavyweight. His name is Alan Crowder, and he's fighting for Bellator, and I'm very happy for the man. He's a great guy to talk to. He's a very unique heavyweight, and that's a discussion for another time. But in other parts of the world, what is happening to the heavyweights? Mark Hunt is talking about leaving the UFC after his contract is over. And that's the freedom of anyone who's under contract. Once that contract is over, your obligation to that organization ends. That is, by the very definition, the nature of a contract. That's how it goes. But how has the world evolved that we're lacking in heavyweights? I can name on one hand this big catcher's mitt of mine how many heavyweights I've met personally. Clark Young, great guy, fought in Altoona. O.J. Vickers, great guy, fought in Pittsburgh. Alan Crowder, great guy, fought in Raleigh. You could say Chase Gamble, he fought at heavyweight, but I think he's more of a natural heavyweight, natural light heavyweight as opposed to heavyweight, so I'm not going to count him. Adam Smith Urbany, fought in Altoona, great guy to talk to, nearly killed me being slammed up against the cage. That's 4 that comes to mind, and I really can't name heavyweights out the other way. So the point I'm trying to make with this is, whoever says that childhood obesity is a problem, well, clearly he does not know that pro athletes have been leaving the heavyweight division as far as mixed martial arts go. The lighter weights are taking over. If Mark Hunt were to leave the UFC, I think he's going to take a big chunk of the UFC's heavyweight personality with him. I can only watch Cain Velasquez versus Junior Dos Santos so many times before I'm like, okay, it's been done. Who cares? They're great fighters. They've had great fights. But after the third or fourth fight in a series, it's like, oh, Lord have mercy. That's why there was no Shamrock versus Ortiz 4. Shamrock versus Ortiz 1, known as probably one of the greatest grudge fights in all of mixed martial arts. Are we really excited to see a fourth one? Love Ken Shamrock, my favorite fighter of all time, but no. I think that everything that could go along with that has been accomplished. I think the heavyweight division is only going to become more selective before it gets any better. I think heavyweights are right now in the wheelhouse of boxing. Vladimir Klitschko. Obviously not ever going to transition to MMA, but a bigger name in boxing. Tyson Fury was talking to Bellator, and now Tyson Fury is coming back to boxing. Deontay Wilder. These heavyweight names. I don't think any of these guys are going to be leaving boxing to come challenge Stipe Miocic. So, where are the heavyweights? I guess I want to kind of end this discussion with you guys telling me something. I mean, I'd like to know, where are the heavyweights going? Am I wrong on this one? Are my perceptions completely wrong? The good news is, the day of the heavyweight being the only draw on a card are completely over. Heavyweights are no longer the biggest draw. In the day of Mike Tyson, yes, he was a heavyweight who was the draw. The heavyweight champion is no longer the champion. Lighterweights have taken their share of the public attention, my friends, and that's good. That's real good. It's why we have guys like Cody No Love Garbrandt. Why guys like Demetrius Johnson are constantly on our radar. Why Conor McGregor is such a big deal that we keep coming up to him in conversation. The heavyweights, though, while not extinct, are certainly endangered in my opinion. Where did the heavyweights go, ladies and gentlemen? Let's ask ourselves that. Now, how do we fix that? How do we make it better? When do the heavyweights get their time to shine again? It's all cyclical. The heavyweights are in danger, but they're not extinct, and they're not in danger of being extinct. In another couple years, the heavyweights could be their time to shine. We're going to be like, oh man, where are all the featherweights? Right now, we're asking ourselves, where are all the bantamweight women? Where are the featherweight women? It's all cyclical. It's all coming around again. So you watch. A couple years from today, we could be talking about how the featherweights have no challengers. To close out the Prizefight podcast, ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk about the greatest of all time and how they might not even really be the greatest of all time. And I need to thank all the folks at ESPN Radio, specifically the ESPN Radio in Wilmington, North Carolina. The Cavaliers versus the Golden State Warriors has been a really discussed series. And I like sports radio. I produce sports radio. I enjoy doing this. But then they're talking about LeBron James being the greatest of all time, comparing him to Michael Jordan. And I almost called into ESPN Radio on this one, and I'll tell you what I was going to say. The thought is, the greatest of all time should be someone who's in the public awareness of people who do not actually watch the sport. That because their greatness should completely transcend awareness. I've watched maybe 5 basketball games in my life, and I think 4 of those were by accident. Even saying that, though, I know that back from the 90s, Michael Jordan was great because Michael Jordan was in the forefront. Michael Jordan's exploits were in the forefront. Same thing with LeBron James. I have heard LeBron James's name more than Kevin Durant's. So with my logic, although it may be flawed, with my logic being what it is, I should say, okay, well, LeBron James has done more great things than what Kevin Durant has done. And then you hear people calling in to ESPN Radio and giving every which argument about why LeBron is or isn't the greatest of all time. And I realize that the conversation of greatest of all time is just that, a conversation. Has the greatest of all time ever been identified? And then I'm thinking, like, well, okay, well, who's the greatest mixed martial artist of all time? We can't agree on that. Some people will say Fedor Emelianenko, and some people will say Anderson Silva. Well, if we can't decide on who's the greatest mixed martial artist of all time, well, who's the greatest boxer of all time? Well, it's either Muhammad Ali or Mike Tyson, right? And then I just completely picked that argument apart. Muhammad Ali competed under different rules than Mike Tyson in boxing. Muhammad Ali may have fought 15-minute rounds, and then Boom Boom Mancini and his tragic fight against Dooku Kim happened. Mike Tyson maybe never got to fight under 15-round rules. So, if you think about this, you're preparing yourself for a pace. Muhammad Ali had to prepare himself mentally for 15 rounds. Mike Tyson only had to prepare himself for 13. And I know this is just a splitting the hairs argument because I don't think Mike Tyson's ever gone 13 rounds. At least not in a fight that was super exciting to watch. So can we say that Muhammad Ali and Mike Tyson were competing under the same rules? Was it identical competition? Was it identical competition? Well, no. We just identified that no, it's not. Okay, so then if Muhammad Ali is the greatest of all time, but Mike Tyson might be, and they're not competing under the same rules, can we even compare the two? Can we have the discussion that Mike Tyson or Muhammad Ali or Mike Tyson is the greatest of all time if they're not competing under the same rules? Anderson Silva and Fedor Emelianenko competed under completely different rules in their time as greatest. Now, Anderson Silva did compete under the same rules that Fedor Emelianenko competed under when he fought Rio Chonan. Anderson Silva lost that fight. So we could argue that under the same rules, Fedor Emelianenko was victorious more than what Anderson Silva was. So by proxy, he should be ruled as the greatest of all time, correct? Wrong. Because Anderson Silva's time as the potential greatest of all time, he competed under the same rules that Fedor Emelianenko competed under in Strikeforce. And we all know what happened there. Fedor Emelianenko lost for the first time, and he lost consecutively against another man who fought in Pride, who fought under the same rules that Fedor Emelianenko was more victorious at. His win ratio was higher. And then I had an epiphany. And I'm talking like cheeks on the seat after Dollar Taco Day epiphany. Can we really ever identify someone as the greatest of all time? And I'm starting to think that the answer is no. That we can identify as someone as greatest of all time. We can say greatest of their era. I think that is a more accurate way to put it. Muhammad Ali was the greatest of his era. Mike Tyson was the greatest of his era. Fedor Emelianenko was the greatest of his era. Anderson Silva, the greatest of his era. That feels better. I can wrap my head around that. The comprehension is there. I understand it. I feel better. I breathe easier. I think the concept of greatest of all time is completely flawed. I think it's an argument point. And I can change my argument, change my opinion by next week. I think greatest of their era or greatest to date is probably the more accurate way to put it. And let's say LeBron James, did LeBron James compete under the same rules as Michael Jordan? I don't follow basketball. I couldn't tell you that. But what if we're touting, okay, we concede LeBron James is the greatest of all time, but what if on LeBron James' last day, he has a gun in his shorts and he decides to shoot someone? Does that then disqualify him as the greatest of all time? And then what does that do to Michael Jordan's legacy that we've already written him off that he is not the greatest of all time? I think the greatest to date is the most accurate way we can put all that. And why was it so important that I needed to talk about it today? Because it was on my mind, and that's what I do. This microphone is a friend. He listens. And by proxy, we put out content for you guys to acknowledge. Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, we are giving away a ton of free sponsorships. Your business could have an advertisement on this podcast, on Cage Nation TV, on Cage Nation TV South, for free. All you have to do is share a picture and tag our social media accounts. And then that's all you got to do. And then we're entering you in a drawing for free sponsorship. We are charging you nothing. There is no obligation to continue with the sponsorship after you've won. We get to part ways, and hopefully we can drum you up some business. All the details right now on www.cagenationtv.com. Next week, I have no idea what we're going to talk about, but it's going to be a lot of fun. It always is. Until next time, everybody. Fights, Cameron, action.
Thank you for tuning in to the Cage Nation Prize Fight Podcast. All rights reserved. 2016 to 2017 Planet Aries Sports. The Prize Fight Podcast is part of the Cage Nation Broadcast Network. For more information, visit www.cagenationtv.com.